Welcome back to Life Beyond Loss, the podcast. This is season 4, episode 1. And this podcast is an amazing guest show where we share the most inspiring and uplifting stories of how people are navigating their own grief and loss, often experiencing healing and transformation as well. I'm your host, Louise Kresick, grief and loss coach, and today I'm talking to Mel Wakeman. She's a registered nutritional consultant. She's also known as the Freedom Food Fighter. And I have to say, at the beginning of this episode, I do refer to this as season 3, which is rather confusing because this is in fact season 4. But Mel is talking very candidly about what loss means to her in the sense of food and her body. We talk about her pivotal happiness moment and how it kind of all started really when her dad left and feelings of loss of self-control. But of course there's some amazing discussion as always, really interesting stuff that Mel has to share, and also some fantastic tips. So please do stay tuned for this one. By Mel Wakeman, and she's a registered nutritional consultant. And Mel, this is the first episode in season 3, so welcome.
Thank you very much, Louise. I feel privileged.
Yeah, like no pressure, not setting the bar or anything, but season 3, we're back, and this is awesome to have you on the show. I'm so excited to do this, and this is really interesting because we're going to bring a whole different angle to grief and loss today, aren't we? We're going to wow everybody. So tell us anyway, because you're also known as the Freedom Food Fighter.
Yeah.
So tell us all about that. Tell us what that means and what it is.
Okay, so yeah, nutrition, you think food, and I've had probably a number of foibles over my whole life, which has meant that I haven't always loved food. I love eating it, but not in the true sense of really loving it and being friends with it. I've had it as an enemy for quite a number of years, about 20 years of my life, really. And in terms of where my sort of work has brought me round, I now really focus on not having food as your enemy, to make peace with it. So that's a freedom food fighter, brings into mind the idea that you can make peace with food, and therefore allow it to nourish both your body and your mind, because that's not always easy for people.
Yeah, it's not, is it? And I guess we're all brought up or conditioned in certain ways and different ways to kind of think about food, and our approach to food is very much shaped on over the years what we've been exposed to, I guess, isn't it, from parents, school, whatever that is. And it's
definitely,
yeah, it's fascinating because this is something that for whatever reason in the last year or so has just kind of come into my conscious awareness now, and starting to become more aware of my own sort of relationship with food. I don't know if it's got anything to do with the fact of approaching 40 and kind of evaluating life in general, but it is, and it feels like this whole message around food is starting to gain traction a little bit out there now. But do you feel that?
Yes, I do. I think, just going back to childhood experiences, food has been a big part of my life, and I've had different relationships with it throughout my life. I was very lucky as a very sort of young child. My dad travelled a lot, so he brought lots of new foods in the days when you could bring food on an aeroplane from different countries, lots of new foods and recipes and things. I had a really interesting early introduction to all sorts of different foods. You know, I grew up in the 70s, and it was very much a meat and two veg kind of time. And I think about, you know, my grandparents' foods or my friends' foods. And so that really sort of spurred an interest for me in food. But then, slowly sort of fell out of love with it, kind of come back into love with it. And what we've seen over the last number of decades really is this massive push into the world of dieting, you know, particularly from sort of the 80s, really. That's when it hit me. And now we come round in the last probably 10 years, it's going along the bandwagon of the anti-diet. And that's where I sit in the non-dieting movement of the world. I think it's wonderful that we are now able to, you know, start to think that, you know, food, it isn't our enemy, and it is way much more than fuel. It's not something to be controlled, and it is something that you kind of can build a really healthy relationship, just like we have healthy relationships with people in our lives.
Definitely. I grew up in the 80s, so all I think is microwave, chicken nuggets. I think my mum actually had a microwave cookbook.
Yeah, I think we did too. And in the 80s was when McCain oven chips came in, yeah. And also Finder's crispy pancakes.
Oh my gosh, remember those? So anyway, I mean, I could talk about this all day with you, but so we're going to sort of talk about, you know, this in your kind of background in the context of loss as well. So I guess I'd love to just ask you a little bit more then about, you know, this idea of loss and what that kind of means to you, and how that kind of fits in, I guess, with, you know, your message and your work and so on.
So yes, loss for me means two things. One is food, which I will explain, and the other is my body. And so I did have this window in my life, probably between the ages of 15 to 35, basically, where I started to exclude food from my body, and food from my diet and my life. And as a result of that, I kind of lost myself, and I lost my identity. So for me, this loss question comes down to what we can feel in relation to connection with our body, and that actually we live in a society where many of us might actually be losing touch with ourselves or losing identity, not necessarily just through sort of perhaps my actions or reactions to food, but I think through our sort of the life transitions that we go through. So I'm, you know, I've as I'll share with you, I've got over a lot of my food foibles, as it were, but I'm still going through a big life transition because I'm 46 soon, and the whole menopause hormones things are going in. It's like, oh, my body's changing again. I don't know if I like it. So yeah, it comes from a body perspective.
Yeah, this is really interesting stuff, which is why I was very excited to kind of share this perspective about loss today. And I think that loss of identity is actually far more common and kind of widespread than people even realise. I think it's easy, isn't it, when you're in that bit of a crisis of loss of identity, to feel like you're the only one, and you kind of think, what the F's going on here? Like, who am I? But it's like panic as well, but then sort of think about you're the only one. But actually, the more I kind of work with people around loss, the more I realise that loss of identity is a really common, almost like a sort of a secondary loss, if you like, to what people initially experience in their life.
Yeah, when I work with a lot of women. It's mostly my client basis in my work, and it comes up again and again in terms of, it's really nice to know that I'm not the only one that feels like this. Mm-hmm. Or, you know, I'm just glad that I'm not alone in this. And there's a huge amount of security and reassurance in talking about this and helping people realize that, gosh, by no means are you going to be alone. whatever your trigger or cause is or thing that you're working through at the moment. It's, I think, one of these, it's a sign of our modern day, I think.
And I think I like to kind of, I only recently discovered, well, I say recently, since I've been working as a grief and loss coach, that I think there's a bit of a reframe around this, that actually there is actually something very positive about feeling, kind of getting lost a little bit and losing our identity. I almost see it now as like a sort of a shedding of, you know, like emerging into a sort of a different version or a newer version of yourself. And I always say now that, like, you're not really lost, you're just kind of on a road to a destination that you're not really quite sure, you know, where it's going to go. And I just liked it. I wish somebody had have said that to me probably a few years back when I was in that situation, when I felt so lost and really, really quite fearful.
That really relates to me, and I love that description. Actually, I think when I go back to not necessarily the beginning of it, but sort of probably in the middle, where I got some help and I had some counselling, and I wasn't in a great place. I was very, very stressed. I wasn't in a great relationship, and I remember the counsellor asking me, "What is it, Mel, that you want?" And I said, "I just want to feel happy. I just want to find peace." And that was that kind of trigger moment. I thought, okay, well, I can do that, because that seems quite simple. It's not, is it, in terms of finding that inner peace and happiness? But that I sort of, happiness for me was something that I had that was tangible to hold on to. And then my journey into, really where I am today, because I'm still working on myself. It's been a complete sort of like blossoming almost. I've actually, on reflection, when I look back at it, it's been one hell of a journey, but I've really relished it. And I found out so many things about myself that I'm so proud of and pleased about, you know?
Yeah. So was it like, for you in that journey, was there like one particular event, or do you think like a series of kind of things leading up to that loss of identity?
I think there are a number of things. That happiness moment was very much pivotal for me. But and then really from that point, I've been working much more, I suppose, positively. The time before that was quite difficult, and I guess the series of things that happened, it started with my dad leaving. So he just left, got up and walked out, basically. And he was my idol at the time. I very much looked up to him. I did a lot of things to try and probably impress him and get some attention, because he did, as I mentioned, he travelled a lot. He was away quite a lot of times. He was one of those sort of absent fathers. And it turned my world upside down when he left. And I had that whole sort of rejection feeling, that was really, really paramount in me. And I think what happened then was that, because everything in my life seemed to be so out of control, was that I decided to turn to food to give me an element of control. I mean, many people may well turn to food for comfort and emotions. I very much understand that. But for me, it was, am I worthy enough? I'm probably not worthy enough. Have I got to prove something to myself, to other people? Lots of things were going on in my head. And so I chose not to really eat a lot of it. I was quite controlling in terms of, I would never let what I deemed to be anything that was bad or unhealthy for me. So anything that was sweet based, cake, dessert based, was off limits for me. It sort of put the fear of God in me, really. And so when I did have those things, there was an element of, well, I've got to burn it off. So I exercised a lot. I had that sort of duo combo of not eating the best foods, and then I think really probably using exercise for punishment in reality, when I look back at it, to try and burn it off. And so that was where I created this quite strong divide in the foods that I gave myself permission to eat. And I think a lot of that was reinforced by not my close family, to be honest, but I think just in terms of society.
Yeah.
And I think about what's out there in, you know, in social media today. It does not make for easy living when you're trying to do the best things for your body and eat a balanced diet. It's you know, we live in a diet culture that says you have to have a diet mentality to eat in a certain way and to look like this. And I think that's started to be an influence for me. And I lost weight, and I didn't like the look of myself. I didn't like my body. I didn't like the way I felt with it either. So I just wasn't happy. I wasn't sure about what I was doing was the right thing, was going to make things any better. But it seemed to be the only option, really. So that was really what I lost. I lost my confidence. I lost my self-esteem. I think that's why I ended up in a sort of probably quite a difficult relationship. And so when I hit that pivotal moment, when I thought, you know what, I need help here, because I'd rejected counselling when I was much younger. My mum tried to get me to go, and I didn't want to go. When I had that counselling and made that decision, do you know what, I need to put myself first for once, because I'm not very good at doing that now, really. I then started to, I think, revise how I saw the world, my role in it, and started very, very, very slowly to take care of myself. And I think when we look at, I suppose, distorted relationships with food or with our body, it is complicated. And there's probably a whole series of, you know, events or triggers that have meant that we get to where we are at any one time.
Yeah, and I was thinking about how, I guess, when we have these emotional upheavals in our life, how then it's quite easy for it to manifest in something like our relationship with food, especially if we're not like sort of dealing with those emotional issues and things, you know, head on. Yeah. And we sort of push them, and this is so common, it's like, because it's uncomfortable, isn't it, and people just think, I'll push it down, I'll carry on or whatever. But then, for like the way I kind of describe it, it's just like it has to bubble up, and for some people it manifests in very different ways. And I guess it sounds very much to me like what you were describing was that element of control, the food relationship was how you were then able to do that, to take control. And it's really interesting. And also, I think when we form those really unhealthy kind of habits and mindsets, then, like you said, society then actually quite easily supports that message, don't they? Like, because it's so easy to lock into and find like reinforcement for that message. Yeah. So, you know, for example, if you are, like you say, very kind of diet orientated, or that's the route that you follow, you then see that throughout your social media, you see it, you know, TV, it's wherever you look for it, isn't it, really?
Yeah, and it's almost like a kind of brainwashing.
Yeah,
to be honest, it really does, I think, shift, you know, not only your beliefs and thoughts, but yes, your whole mindset. And so then your, you know, reactions and experiences around food and your own body become habitual. And what we then have, the work that I do is then really trying to sort of look back and try and question those beliefs. So, you know, in terms of finding evidence behind those distorted beliefs, that, you know, in terms of why they're wrong, but then unlearning those unhealthier habits that don't do you any favors, they don't serve you at all, and then opening your mind up to looking at, you know, food, diet, your body differently, in a much more compassionate way.
How was it that you came to kind of realise that what you were doing was actually, you know, not serving you, and it was, you know, an unhealthy way to kind of deal with things?
It stressed me out ridiculously. It was exhausting. And I think when I look at, you know, I look back at pictures and I think, oh God, you look terrible. You just don't look well. And it was probably my friends, my close friends. I have one in particular who was just like, Mel, this is not good. You need to sort yourself out. And I think if I'd just been left to my own devices, I probably would have carried on. but I'm very aware, I'm very empathic of other and aware of other people. And I think it's probably my closest friends that made me go, you know what, this isn't good. You're right. I don't look well. I'm not well in myself. I'm not enjoying what I'm doing. You know, I had knee problems from exercising. I was in that age where, you know, the Reebok step was in. That was, and I had one in my living room. And yeah, I kind of ruined my knees from going on that all the time. And I think it happened at university, where I was towards the end of the year, the third year there, and I just thought, look, I've got this whole life ahead of me. And I wanted at that point to go into more specific nutrition science. I went on to do a master's after I finished my undergraduate degree. And it was like, you know, I've left home. I've got to look after myself. There are other people in this life that care about me. So do you know what? I'm going to start to do things that I need to do to look after myself.
And for me, and I think for many other people as well, I think sometimes it's that realization, actually, shit, I think I've got a choice here in this situation. Like, do you know what I mean? I think up until that point, most people feel quite disempowered, and that it's like things are being done to them, or they're kind of having to, I don't know, for whatever reason, go down a particular route. But then I think for most people, that realization, actually, I've got a choice, and there are other ways. And, you know, does that resonate with you?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that when you're in the midst of it and you can't really see the wood for the trees, you feel lost. You don't feel that you have a choice, but we have a choice for everything. You know, we have a choice about how we react to situations, and we have a choice about, you know, what we're going to do with our life. So definitely. And I think it's realizing that you've actually got some options, and that if you have the right support, you can find out what your choices are, and you can make the choice that feels right for you at the time.
So how would you describe your, I mean, you've said that this is very much a journey that you're, you know, still on, and I think we all are, like, we're all constantly growing and evolving and changing, and change is the constant, isn't it?
Yes.
But I wondered, how would you kind of just describe that sort of transformation for you? So from that person who you were, obviously developing these healthy habits and all of that, through to that realization, and then to now, how would you sort of describe that transformation?
I think it probably started when in my early 20s. So I finished my first degree I did physiology and biochemistry and bit of nutrition, and I just thought, well, this really interests me. I've always loved science, and I've always loved food in a weird way, and it was quite common sense for me, quite logical to go, well, I'm just going to keep on going in this, because, and it's quite interesting when you look at the people, that the professionals that work particularly around sort of dietetics and nutrition, quite often, and there is some research on this, there's quite often they've got a particular personal interest in nutrition and health. It's often why people might venture down that road. Not all the time, obviously, but it can be there. And so I did a master's in nutrition, and then I went into education. I taught degree level nutrition, and I did that for 23 years. All of that time learning. So for me, education, learning, research was really important, so I could get a better understanding. You know, I was fascinated by food and the human body, but gosh, it taught me a lot about myself. That was really, really powerful. And then, as you know, as you go through life's journey, I did end up ultimately, you know, I was in a bad relationship for about 11 years. I left that. That was probably the next big stage in my early 30s, where I kind of really started to find myself, because I was on my own then. And it was like, right, okay, I can now find the things that I enjoy doing, find myself again. And ultimately, you know, my life has improved immeasurably. I'm very happy. I have found my happiness. You know, I've met a wonderful man. I have a little boy. And the last thing I did, which is coming up to 2 years ago, was I left employment because that wasn't really doing me much good health wise. And at that point, 2 years ago, I knew I wanted to go into this non-diet nutrition area. I'd been teaching nutrition to all sorts of healthcare practitioners, and all the time we've been talking about, obesity and government guidelines, and talking about all the major health risks and diseases in our lifetime. And I did some self-development. I went on some courses with one of the leading dietitians that looks in the area of really non-diet nutrition and body respect, a lady called Lucy Aframore. And she's one of the sort of very well-known voices in non-diet nutrition, along with a lady called Linda Bacon. And they take an approach called health at every size. And it fascinated me, and it kind of blew my mind in terms of, so all this advice that we've been given to, eat less, move more, we've got to eat less, get thinner, that's how we're going to combat the obesity crisis. Absolute rubbish. So I spent the last couple of years studying weight science and surrounding myself with the professionals and the leaders and the movements that are around anti-diet and non-diet nutrition. And that's really brought me to where I am now, in terms of, that's what I do. I study weight science. I particularly help women escape this land of forbidden foods and fad diets. I want to help people build this sustainable, healthy relationship with food and themselves that brings in that self-compassion and body respect. So I'm still studying like a Trojan at the moment because I'm fascinated by it, but it's all still very new in emerging science. So there's lots of things coming out at the moment around weight stigma and how weight discrimination actually contributes to more overweight. And it's, I am somebody that has what we call thin privilege. I have never been in a very fat body, but I'm coming to this from my internal narrative, my inner bullies and critics, the internal conversations that actually, no matter what size we are, we probably all have.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I'm very empathetic in listening to people that, whatever shape and size you are, we're all worthy and all should have space to allow food into our lives and to make peace with it. Did that answer the question?
Yeah, no, I think that's fun. I love this whole journey that you've been on, and all the things that you've kind of, again, it's been about a choice of empowering yourself as well to, give yourself the information to learn more, to kind of dig deep into it, to experience things as they are. And it's just fantastic. And I really want to know, what do you think then are the life lessons, or maybe one of the life lessons that this has taught you on a personal level?
I have quite a lot, so I've got to pick 3, haven't I? I think the first one is appreciate all the things that your body can do. We can be very self-critical, very judgmental, but every day our body does amazing things, whether it's just breathing, laughing. I love the idea of sort of caring and hugging. You don't have to be a dancer or an athlete or do anything particularly physical. And I think it's so important just to pause and take a moment to celebrate all of those things and never take them for granted. And what's something else? Something that I'm doing, like literally at the moment over this last month, I'm practicing it myself, is I'm making a joy of self-love. A jar of self-love. So I have this lovely little jar, and every day I write little slips of paper and I write something nice about myself to go in there. So something that I like or love about myself, that I'm grateful for, that I appreciate. So lots of gratitude and joy going into this jar. And it's really nice to look at things that aren't related to your appearance. And I don't believe in weighing, so I would never put anything in there about, you know, clothes sizes or how much anybody weighs. But, you know, you can ask your loved ones, your best friends, your family members, what they love about you that isn't appearance related. Write it down, put it in the jar. And then when you're feeling a bit fed up, you can just take a couple out. I think that's a really nice way to reaffirm and just bring the positives to our forefront about who we are as a person.
Yeah, I love that, because I mean, I put a post out on LinkedIn recently about gratitude, because it's something that I do practice. I've got a really good app on my phone, but I also said, how often do people actually take the time to thank themselves? Because it's like we're so easily thanking everything in the universe, and it's a really, you know, I believe really healthy habit to have. But actually taking as much time to thank ourselves and appreciate ourselves for who we are and what we do and how we show up and what we're working with, and all of that is equally, if not more, important.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think my last one is, in order to get where I am today, you know, I've had counselling, coaching, I've studied and I practice what's called intuitive eating, which is much more in sort of getting in tune with your body's own hunger and fullness cues. And what's really enabled me, I think, to make this shift has been to find time. And as somebody that suffers with anxiety and it gets quite stressy and wired, sitting down and being quiet isn't very conducive to me. It's not very natural. But I write. So this idea of, you know, finding me time and time out. I'm not great at reading. I do enjoy reading, but I like listening. So I listen to podcasts. I listen to audiobooks. There are some great podcasts. One that's called Food Psych, which is by a registered dietitian called Christy Harrison. And then another one called Going Beyond the Food by Stephanie Dodier. And they're really very much embracing intuitive eating, non-diet nutrition, and looking at, you know, body acceptance and body respect. So I constantly reinforce the messages, the positive messages that I'm wanting to come into my head, as well as, you know, my clients. I journal a lot, but I'm also very critical of social images and media messages. So, you know, my last probably bit of advice is pay attention to the pictures, the slogans, or the attitudes that you see or feel around you that don't make you feel good, that maybe make you question yourself and your body. So just remove them from your view. I've done a lot of shedding and removal of things that don't serve me, that come in all sorts of different shapes and forms. But it's about finding and creating your little protective bubble and not letting anyone else pop it. Absolutely.
Totally agree with that. I think that your experience of the world in general is about what you kind of choose to surround yourself with. And I think, again, you know, it's no point moaning about like social media is negative or the news brings me down. Well, actually, it's about realizing again that we do have a choice in this, so we can, you know, decide where our attention goes. And it's the quote where attention goes, energy flows, or something like that. So it is about, like you say, being very selective and just soaking up and sucking in all the kind of the positive stuff and the stuff that really supports you. So I absolutely 3 or maybe 4 fantastic tips there. I'm not sure, but they were all great, Mel. And thank you so much for agreeing to come on the show and talk about this, because, as I said, this is a kind of an untouched subject so far on this podcast particularly, but I think that it's really good to open up the conversation around this and get people thinking. And I feel like we've still got loads more to talk about in the future.
Yeah, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for having me on. I really, really enjoyed talking about it. And I hope it helps. I hope it helps people too.
Oh, and before we go, let's just tell people where they can kind of find you as well. That would be really useful.
Okay. My name is Mel Wakeman, and my nutrition consultancy is called Wakeman Nutrition. So I'm on Instagram just as me, Mel Wakeman, and my website is all the W's, wakemannutrition.com. And I do have, if anybody's on Facebook, I have a private Facebook group that's called the Diet Free Zone, which is just for people that want to escape that pressing diet messaging that we see out there, and it's a really safe, supportive and encouraging group. So yeah, that's feel free to find me and stalk me.
And what a wonderful group it is. Thank you for the pancake prompt, because I had my pancakes on Saturday morning.
Brilliant.
Thank you.
All foods are welcome, Louise. All foods are welcome.
Absolutely.